He was a morbidly obese surgeon destined for an operating table and an early death. Now he's a rebel MD who is fabulously fit and fighting to make America healthy again. This is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia.
It's the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast with Dr. Philip Ovadia. I blanked there for a minute. Which one is of these am I doing? And for those of you who are actually watching rather than just listening, you can see Phil is in his surgical scrubs. Yes, he really does.
I don't just play one on TV.
Not just play one on TV. Phil, tell us about our guest here. I'm eager to learn more here.
Yeah, no, this is going to be a great one. We have Angela Lerro with us today. And I met Angela, I think it was maybe at Meat Stock was the first time we met in person. We probably had interacted online prior to that. And she's got an amazing and inspiring story to tell, but then she's doing some real interesting work that we're going to talk about. And I think, it just brings another unique perspective on the power of diet and how it can play a role in overall health. And we're specifically going to talk some today about maybe some of the less talked about, less thought about aspects of health that Angela focuses on. So before we get to that, Angela, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, kind of tell them a little bit about your journey and what's got you to where you are today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ovadia, and thank you so much, Jack. It's really just an honor to be here today and to talk to your audience. And thank you so much for inviting me onto your podcast. And yes, we did. We met at Meat Stock, Dr. Ovadia. I remember I was putting butter on your burger, and I was like, "You're the guy that fixed hearts." And
that's not a euphemism, by the way. She was actually putting butter on an actual burger for me.
Yes, I was putting butter on your burger. And you're the guy that fixes hearts. And you said, I am. And I said, I fix hearts too. And that's how we got into talking about some of the work that I do, which is energy work. Because as we all know, when disease manifests into a physical form, it starts emotionally. It can start emotionally and energetically.
Let's find out about you, though, because we're definitely going to go down that road. But I very briefly scanned your website, and you talked about your own journey from unwellness to wellness, and you mentioned some things in there. I don't want to do a spoiler here, but there's some pretty extraordinary things that happened.
Absolutely. And that's where I was going with this too, because I truly believe that I had my own significant emotional blockages that manifested itself into physical diseases. And my journey started basically like throughout my entire life. I had a very traumatic upbringing and lost my father at age 9. And during that time, I had mysterious health issues. I was going to the doctors 24/7. It was always a different prescription and a different diagnosis.
Oh boy.
And they never actually could figure out what it was that was causing it. And then it was everything from hormonal issues, digestive issues, sinus issues, chronic sinus infections, chronic allergies, you name it, neurological issues, heart issues. I mean, it was just, here's another prescription. And at the time, I was eating a standard American diet. I was a kid living in the 90s. Do I need to say more? And then, fast forward into my 20s. And at this point, I was raised in northeastern Pennsylvania. And when I was 18, I moved to Los Angeles to go to college. And that was more stress, more trauma, more weird illnesses that were waxing and waning. And of course, being a college student, my diet wasn't exactly the best, and which led me ultimately to having breast cancer
Oh, jeez.
when I was 28 years old back in 2013. And, I was very grateful and fortunate that we caught it early, but we still couldn't figure out, why did Angela get breast cancer at 28? And why, did she now all of a sudden develop even more conditions and more mysterious illnesses after the breast cancer was supposedly removed? I didn't do chemo or radiation because they were able to catch it soon enough before it hit my lymph nodes. But I did have to have a mastectomy and reconstruction surgery. And that ultimately led to more autoimmune issues. So I suffered severely from histamine intolerance and mast cell activation syndrome, but I didn't know that was what it was called until 4 years later, or 5 years later. I had a surgery for thoracic outlet syndrome, which then had a bazillion complications. Now, one of the things that,
Oh, okay. You slow down a little bit because I'm not medical.
yeah,
Phil, can you
So,
real quickly just translate all that junk she was dealing with?
yeah, so the quick and dirty of thoracic outlet syndrome, which is I wouldn't call it uncommon, but it's also not something that people talk about every day. It's basically where the nerves and blood vessels are exiting the chest and going out to your arms. And that those nerves and blood vessels can be compressed by some, abnormal anatomic features in that area that have to do with the muscles and the ribs as we're kind of coming out from the chest into the neck and the arms.
Good Lord.
And that's what Angela was referring to.
yes. And I almost lost my left arm because it took them 5 years to figure out that it was thoracic outlet syndrome. They just kept thinking it was a compressed nerve, and they were using lidocaine and different types of scaling block methods, just to get the nerves to calm down because I didn't have any feeling in my hand or my arm.
Oh.
And at the same time that all of this was going on, I was also eating a predominantly plant-based diet. Because when I got breast cancer, the first thing my oncologist and cancer team talked about was eating mostly vegetarian or vegan. And because I was developing all of these food sensitivities and food allergies, I was diagnosed with, being allergic to gluten, soy, dairy, nuts, seafood. So really the only thing I had left was like small amounts of meat and as many vegetables as I could put in my body. And so I got really into juicing and smoothies and plant protein powders just to get enough nourishment because I was starting to lose a lot of weight. And during that time at my cancer center, I was introduced to energy work. And because energy work was so connected to the vegan world, if you think about like yoga, spiritual work, it's
Yep.
all vegan focused. So I felt like I was doing myself the biggest favor by staying vegan and, eating mostly plants. Now, here I am doing this work for 5 years, but I'm still, I'm dealing with the thoracic outlet syndrome. I have surgery and I move into a new home. I started a new relationship and I didn't realize that home was filled with mold and it was severely water damaged. It was an older home. And my treatment room where I was working out of was filled with mold. And we didn't realize that until we broke up, 3 years later, and we had to sell the house. So at that time was around the time when I had that surgery. I had a surgery to remove the rib for the thoracic outlet syndrome. And I suffered severely with complications. I was in the ICU because they nicked my lung and my lung collapsed. And a whole that was a whole thing, having a collapsed pneumothorax and not being able to breathe. I was I was filling up with fluid. And when I finally got released from the hospital, I started to have severe fainting spells. And that was if I can give you context, was April 2019. And I went to neurologists and then I saw cardiology, and then, and I finally was diagnosed with something called autonomic dysfunction. So I started fainting 15 times a day.
Oh, good
I,
grief.
just because I couldn't, every time I stood up, the blood would pool to my legs and I would pass out. I had to teach my dog how to walk me, which is funny because my dog was a big German Shepherd. So I got him a fake service dog vest, and he learned how to help me go to the bathroom, help me stand up. He also knew when my blood pressure was crashing to bark at me to sit down. This dog I don't even know how I got so lucky to train him, because I trained him myself to do these things. And I was doing everything I thought was right. I was staying true to my plant-based diet, trying to eat healthy, trying to meditate and pray and keep my stress levels down. And I just kept getting sicker and sicker. And it wasn't until February 2021 I went to Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from, to take care of my mother. She was having a knee replacement surgery. And mind you, this whole thing from started in April 2019 after this surgery. So by that time, by February 2021, I was knocking on death's door, because at this point I was 89 pounds.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
I I had no cognitive function at this point. My blood pressure was extremely low. I don't even know how I got on a plane to go be with my mom, but my relationship had ended. My ex ended up taking the dog. So I knew that I needed to go be with my mom. She was having a knee replacement surgery, and I thought if I could just help her, maybe I could also help myself. And going to Pennsylvania, it actually ended up what saved my life, because that is where I found out that this whole time and my entire life, I had been battling with neurological late stage Lyme disease. And then I found out that I had the co-infections Babesia and Bartonella.
Okay, Phil, real quick, interpret that.
Yeah, she talked about autonomic dysfunction, right? Which the autonomic nervous system is our, unintentional, right, nervous system, right? Autonomic. And it regulates things like our blood pressure, and it controls when our blood vessels sort of open up or close down, which is one of the ways that we regulate blood pressure. And that was not working very well for Angela. And one of the things that can occur with untreated Lyme disease is that it can have those types of neurologic effects. And it's, as Angela kind of found out, unfortunately, right? It's one of those things that oftentimes doctors just say there's no explanation for your problems because they don't know how to look deep enough, or they don't know some of these things to look for. Lyme disease is still a very controversial topic within the medical world. Not does it exist, but these chronic manifestations of it sometimes aren't really fully recognized, I would say, within the traditional medical system.
Okay.
And, that's a lot of what Angela struggled against. And it's compounded by the fact that she's in California where, Lyme disease doesn't really exist natively, whereas,
Right.
it's endemic in the Northeast and Pennsylvania. So I have a feeling, and maybe Angela will go into a little bit of that detail, that's only why it got figured out, because she gets back to where people, at least the doctors, do know some about Lyme disease, and we're able to kind of recognize this.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. Because at this point, like I was saying, I had lost a significant amount of weight, being only 89 pounds. I stopped weighing myself once I got down to 89. I was too afraid to step on the scale after that. But they wanted to put me on a feeding tube and give me, you know, different formulas. And I was like, I can't do that. And I was just losing more and more safe foods because my mast cells, so mast cell activation syndrome is it's a disease that's connected to the nervous system and the digestive system. So when you eat certain foods, you have these allergic type reactions. And for me, I was going into anaphylactic shock after eating so many different, just all my plant foods, everything that I was making for myself. And my neurologist in California were telling me that I was just going to have to live like this for the rest of my life. And I knew in my heart that if that was the case, I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to die in a couple months. I could feel it. And so did my family. And we actually started getting my affairs in order
Wow.
because I just was not, we didn't know what was going on, and I was just getting sicker. And I just had to finally say, you know what, I've been doing holistic health for 5 years. I'm going to just do what I know, and I'm going to unlearn everything that I learned, and I'm going to find something else. Because if what I know is not working, that means I need to find out and learn something new. And one of the things that I noticed that I was still having minor reactions, but I wasn't having as severe. And that was to meat, which was wild. And I thought, well,
The thing that is the source of all our problems is the one thing you didn't have any reaction to. I love it.
and I'm like, I'm still kind of having these slight reactions, but at least they're not anaphylaxis. So if I have to have a little minor itching or a little minor, like indigestion or hives or something, then I'll take that over having my heart beat out of my chest and feeling like I'm going to pass out any day. So I started then eating like small amounts of beef that I was finding in Pennsylvania. And at the same time, I'm being encouraged to be checked for Lyme disease by my old neighbor because he kept insisting since he had it. He's Angela, why didn't they ever check you for Lyme disease? I said, why would it be Lyme disease? I lived in California for 18 years at that time. I was like, there's no reason. And he said, yeah, but you were born and raised in Pennsylvania. And Lyme is an opportunistic infection, meaning when your immune system is stressed out or you go through something significant, that gives it an opportunity to come out of dormancy and attack your body. And he was then going, look, you were living in mold. You were in a stressful relationship. You had a stressful surgery. He said, your immune system was no longer capable of keeping this infection at bay. And then he said, look at the rest of your health history. Because this neighbor has been in my family for a long time. So he's known me pretty well. So I called my doctor in California to run a Lyme panel for me through Quest. And he didn't want to. And so I lied and I said, I just got bit by a tick while I was hiking in Big Bear a couple weeks ago. And now I'm having some mysterious issues. Can you just run the test? So that was how I actually got the test run. And sure enough, it came back positive. And I then called my neurologist and I say, why didn't you ever test me for this? And he said, because Lyme doesn't exist in California. And that is when I lost my mind. But people do leave California. And why was this never an option? They diagnosed me with every neurological condition under the sun because of my autonomic dysfunction. I had everything, they even took my driver's license away from me. So I felt so dismissed and gaslit even when I brought it to them. And I just took matters into my own hands. I was able to eat meat, thank goodness. And I ended up Googling, can I survive off of only eating meat? Because I didn't even know what a carnivore diet was. I just was like, I guess meat is something that I'm able to eat. And that's when I found all of these, carnivore MDs and books by Dr. Paul Saladino when he was still carnivore, and Dr. Sean Baker, and I think Dr. Chafee was there too. Like I started seeing their books and their Instagrams, and that's when I also started to learn about Dr. Ovadia, and I'm over here just, Lord, wow, this is quite a community that there are people out here surviving on meat. And then that led me into learning about non-aged meat that is significantly lower in histamine. So I called over 500 farms in the US to find a farmer that would sell me non-aged meat, which I did find in the Chicago area, and it's called Billy Doe Meats. And I only consumed their meat for 2.5 years while I got my health back. And by the time, I found them in like late February, and then I finally saw like a Lyme literate medical doctor in March. And he looked at me and he said, you are too sick for me to treat. You are an absolute train wreck. You are going to have to figure out a way to get yourself a little healthier before I even give you something. Because if I give you a supplement, because I was so reactive, I could give you an antibiotic or I could give you an herbal supplement, and both could potentially harm you because you're so reactive. So get yourself a little healthier. And I just remember staring at him and then thinking to myself, okay, I guess this is no longer about me trying to find answers outside of myself to heal. This is my time to really start to question everything that I've been taught, everything that I thought I knew, and start unlearning and start healing in the way that I was supposed to. So I took my power back and started my crazy meat diet with my non-aged meat, and started really learning and leaning into more holistic healing modalities, and including the energy work that I had been so connected to before when I had breast cancer and was really leaning into that. But now I felt like I found this new tool, which was the carnivore diet. And once I started to braid the two of them together, it was like fireworks went off. And I truly started to heal. And I, focused on other modalities like my lymphatic system, also focused on detoxing, just using all just traditional methods to get these toxins out of my body while nourishing my body and my soul. So it's when I really understood the whole practice of mind, body, and spirit, and making that decision and really owning the work and being true to what I needed to do, instead of listening to everybody that wanted me to do it their way. It was such a profound moment, and to see my body starting to come back to life between eating the meat and incorporating the spirit and addressing the emotions and the trauma that were buried in my energetic field. It was like, you know, it was magical. I guess you could say it was truly magical. And
Yeah.
it started to make sense to me because I started to think of humans as a car, right? If you think about it, you have a car, and if you have this car and it has tires, but it doesn't have gasoline, it's not going to run. But if the car has gasoline and no tires, it's still, you can't drive it. And it's the same thing with the engine. So the car has to have an engine, a transmission, tires, gasoline for it to run. So why are we any different? We have to address all parts of our body so that we can function and heal and be alive and thrive in this world.
Yeah, let's kind of dig into that part of this a little bit. So you go by on Instagram, you're a meat-based medium, and medium is not how you order your steaks cooked. It refers to this energetic healing, and that's a term that probably a lot of people aren't familiar with, or maybe they've heard but don't really know, what is that? What is this other aspect of people's health that you help to bring into focus and help to heal for them?
Yes. So I have a little backstory about the medium part, and I'll bridge that into the work that I do. So I grew up very in a very metaphysical home, I'd say. My dad, before he passed away when I was 9, was insanely intuitive. And it was something that I developed. I believe that he passed it on to me because when I was as maybe 4 or 5, basically as far as I can remember, being in my little bed starting in my bed when I was a toddler, I would always wake up to seeing spirits. And I would not only see spirits, but I would hear things. And probably most people would probably think that their kids are probably maybe having some, imagination, an imagination, or maybe that there's something wrong. But I would also get visions as I got older. I would start getting visions of things, and then they would happen. And and it carried on with me. And it felt like it was also the coolest thing, but it was also like, it felt like the biggest, darkest secret that I was holding. And, my mother, even after my dad passed on, my mother was very well aware of these gifts. But at the same time, because my dad passed away, I almost felt like I didn't really know how to use them the right way. And it was like that part of me that also died was that part. Now, fast forward to when I get breast cancer, and I'm at my cancer center in Beverly Hills called Tower Cancer Research Foundation, and they offered Reiki. And I was very familiar with Reiki and energy work, but I had not experienced it since I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, before my dad passed away. We were very, my dad was very connected energetically. When I saw that this was offered at my cancer center, I thought, this is wild. It's being offered at this medical center. So I went, and I'm maybe just a couple months post one of my reconstruction surgeries, and my mast cells and my histamine levels were through the charts. And I meet this woman who is channeling Reiki, and she said, "Do you know why you're sick?" And I just said, "Yeah, I had breast cancer." And she said, "No, because you're not using your gifts, and that psychic intuitive energy that you've been carrying your whole life is starting to attack you." And I just remember, I bursted out into tears, and I said, "My teacher died, which was my father. And when I was a young girl, and I just never knew how to use them, so I suppressed them." And she said, "When the student's ready, the teacher appears." And she channeled Reiki for me that day at the cancer center. And then from there, I started working with her and going to her for sessions. And at that time, I was on a leave of absence from my job. I was in the fashion industry. And it took me about 9 months of healing with her that it became very clear to me that my purpose was to be of service, to help other people doing this work. And so I started training with her. And so that was in 2014 was when I started training with her. And I finished my training with her in February 2015. And I started my practice in May 2015. And during these 9 months and during the time that I started practicing, I started noticing that all of the intuition, the anxious energy that I was feeling was starting to come alive. And once I started speaking out about what I was feeling, what I was seeing, what I was experiencing, this anxious energy started to just go away. The heart palpitations started to go away. My body felt like a new person. And I felt like I had this new soul that I was navigating. And I even started, like, when I would work with my sessions. So I also want to be very mindful of the fact that when I started my practice, I went back to Tower Cancer Foundation, which is connected to Cedars-Sinai. And I started working with the cancer patients there. They allowed me to go back and work with those cancer patients. And then my doctors, who were very close to me, sent me patients. So it wasn't like I started this practice in this like woo spiritual community, right? Like I was starting it looking at this from a medical and connecting it with the metaphysical, and seeing that it wasn't just me that was having these profound effects in healing, but the more I was working on these really sick people, I was seeing their lives transform and them heal. And the things that were coming up a lot were trauma and physical dis-eases that were manifested from these emotional dis-eases on the body. And I started to, and that was something that I learned throughout my journey. I uncovered a lot of emotional dis-eases and spiritual dis-eases that were also affecting my physical health. And so the more, the longer I've been doing this work now, we're here over 10 years, the things that I see within my clients, that's why I just started leaning into the meat-based medium, is because I see things and within my clients and within their sessions, and I'll never diagnose or anything like that. I always work alongside with doctors, but I'll be the first to say, I see this. We need to go to your doctor and have him look at this, or let's look at this trauma, or I'll pull something up and they're like, yes, that happened to me. That happened to me when I was 2 years old. You're exact. So I've been doing this now for 10 years, and it's been such the most incredible part, because sometimes I don't even believe myself. Like the things that I see and the things that I have to say, I am like, this is how it's going to come out. I don't know how you're going to take this, but here it is.
So
And
is the work you're doing similar to Carolyn Mace's work?
she is my guru. I love her so much. I've learned so much about Carol, about her throughout my journey. She was the first person
Okay.
when I started doing this work, when receiving it. My healer that I worked with actually sent me to Caroline Miss, and I read almost all of her books, and I started to feel like, wow, this human being. I never felt so seen by this human, by this woman. She's amazing.
Okay. I now have context for what you're talking about. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe go into a little bit more context for someone who's out there and they have, whatever it might be, a condition, right? And maybe they've been listening to this podcast for a while and they're thinking, okay, carnivore diet, low carb, my problems are all rooted in what I'm eating. What maybe are some indicators that there are issues beyond that need to be addressed, and maybe just talk a little bit more about what it is that you do with people. And I'll admit, right, when I first sort of heard about this work, I'm like, oh, sounds like therapy, right? Psychotherapy, talk about your, past traumas and, help to heal from that, get over it, get past it type thing. But I know this is very different. So maybe help people to understand how it's different and what you actually do with people. But like I said, start with maybe what are some of the indicators that people might recognize that this is something that they need to address.
Sure. So a lot of people, when they are going through chronic illness, I'm going to use chronic illness as an example, but it doesn't have to be chronic illness. You might just be feeling really stressed out. I mean, we all know that stress is is a major root cause of disease. So when I think about the body being stressed out, we have to look at what is stressing it out. It's not just one thing. It's the food that we eat. If we're not eating the right foods, we're eating processed foods. If we're overdoing it on sugar, we're eating plant toxins, we're not getting the right fresh air, we're in a rut with our relationships. Those are just a few things. Your environment that you're living in, all of those things, even your relationships, like these all are contributing factors to poor health. And so when I see somebody who is chronically ill, it's usually they feel like they're so beyond repair because their bucket is just completely full. So that being said, when you add more stress to somebody who is sick, because it's not only that their body is stressed out because they're sick, their mind is stressed out because they feel like they're lost. They feel like they've lost hope. So what I do with my clients is that I bring them in, I sit down with them, and I hear their story. I listen to them. And I think that's something that a lot of people, our practitioners, don't do. They talk without listening. And then from there, we focus one thing at a time. I try to do everything simultaneously, but I focus individually. First, we focus on the physical. Let's look at your diet. What are you eating? What are you not eating? What are you willing to give up? Because the thing is that most people, they have to make the decision. Everybody all need to make the decision to heal. But most people don't want to give up the thing that's making them sick
Huh.
to help them get well. And so, because of that, we got to go into the energy. Why are we so stuck on that? Why are we so stuck on our patterns? Why are we so stuck on creating? We don't want to bring in new things because it creates change and it could be scary. There's a lot of fear. And yes, it is very therapeutic, talk therapy with energy work, but a lot of times people will sit in therapy and they will just talk in circles because they don't really know what's wrong. So, what I do is whether I'm working remotely, 98% of my practice is all done over the phone. And then if you're in Los Angeles, you can come to my practice. I have a studio that you can come to do in person. But I work with people around the world and I do it all over the phone. I don't do Zoom, I just do the phone. And so I have them go into a meditative state. And while they're in that meditative state, I get off the phone and I channel the energy. So I connect with their energy field. I clear these blockages away and I figure out what's going on, and where they are storing this trauma. And
Now, would you say where? You're talking about like
in their body,
in their body. Okay.
physically. And like I said, the nervous system is very intelligent. I mean, it operates our immune system. We have a heartbeat that we have a heart that beats without being plugged in. I mean, it's our electricity. So that is why energy works so well, even when you're not in front of that person, even when you're miles apart and across the world. I mean, I work with people in Australia, and it's just as efficient as the person that's sitting on my table in front of me. Because energy doesn't require a space. We are all connected, right? So as I'm channeling this, I see where people are storing these blockages within their body. And this is what's very interesting, is because sometimes you'll have somebody who has severe chronic illness and they're holding it all in their gut. And they'll have severe IBS, digestive system issues, constipation, diarrhea, gastroparesis. Sometimes they'll see it in their hips and they're on the verge of having a hip replacement. And a lot of times I see it in their heart because they're carrying a lot of grief, a lot of heartache. And this is, you can even look further into this, such as from Dr. Gabor Mate. He wrote a book called When the Body Says No. And he talks about how, and same with Louise Hay, about how a lot of the times when we're storing these emotions emotionally and energetically, within the body physically, they do manifest themselves into physical symptoms. So that's what I address in my session is where are you holding these emotions? And what trauma is it that needs to be addressed first? Because most of the time, people that go through significant amount of trauma, their memory doesn't remember. So when I pull up, I'm not going to pull up the exact memory, but I'll pull up something like, tell me, what I'm feeling today is something that happened to you when you were 3 years old. And then I will give the details slightly because I want them to find it.
Right.
And we together put that story together. So they're doing the work, but I'm just leading the way. And as we pull up, it's like pulling a weed out of their body. It's what it feels like. It feels like a cord. We just pull these cords out, and you can see their nervous system starts to unravel and starts coming back to itself. So we start with that. At the same time, I also focus on making sure that they're nourishing themselves, because this work, it's very intense. This isn't, I think sometimes people, the common stereotype of this work can be very woo and light and airy. And I'm much more into the impact. I'm much more, I want to make an impact, and let's look at the science of this work, and let's make sure that you are nourishing your body as much as you are nourishing your soul. So in order for you to be able to truly heal, you've got to put nourishing, grounding foods. Protein and fat are the best things that you can eat when you're healing, because it's going to help ground that nervous system. It's going to help you like feel strong, because people that are eating these plants and they're vegan, they have their muscles, their energy, their strength during when they're sick. They're so frail, they're so weak. And I see them. I mean, a lot of my clients that I was seeing that weren't eating a lot of meat, oh my gosh, they had no color to them. They're flying off my table. Or if I was working on them distantly, I'd be like, oh my gosh, is this energy work going to be too strong for them? How can they even hold this? And I have to say, since I've been carnivore, being able to channel this energy is even better than when I first started, because it feels so much more grounded. I feel so much more connected to my clients. I feel so much more connected to the source of this energy, where it's coming from. And it feels so much better in my body that I don't get tired anymore. I used to only be able to do maybe one session a day, and then I would be exhausted afterwards. And I am now, it's like I see multiple clients a day, and I feel fantastic. And my clients are seeing miracles within their body. And so really braiding the two, the diet with the energy work, it's not only been a miracle for me, but it's been a miracle for so many others too.
I was a deep skeptic of all these types of things for a long time. And for our listeners who maybe be in the same boat, I would point you to, there's one book in particular that I think really addresses the work that Angela does from an intensely scientific standpoint. That is The Holographic Universe by, oh, I've gone completely blank on the name. It's a book that was written in the early 90s, but it is written by an investigative journalist with a deep guiding sense of let's get to that which is real and verifiable and not just people's opinions. And the reality is that what Angela's been saying here, energy, although it's kind of got this reputation of woo,
Yeah.
it is this thing without which we're just hunks of meat.
Yeah.
And until the energy, which really there are no scientists who can say, oh, there's some energy, there's a bottle of it, and here's a gallon of it, and here's a foot of it. And it's pretty freaking mysterious. And yet it is, in fact, something that we can test. The Holographic Universe is an extraordinary read that'll just give you a kind of a more scientific foundation for understanding why energy work is so effective. I hope I didn't take you off the path, but as somebody who really struggled with it for a long time, that's one of the things that I found really helpful. And while
What
you're following up, I'll track down the author's name.
Yeah, what I wanted to hear from Angela before we kind of wrap up is, why do you think the energy movement, and energy practitioners are aligned, let's say, with, veganism, when, clearly, right, our bodies thrive off of meat, right? This is what human beings were designed to eat. And where do you think that disconnect kind of came from? And how do you think we start to undo that, right? Because I agree with you, right? This makes perfect sense, and you've experienced it, and you've experienced it with your clients, right? If you're not fueling your body, you can't really hope to correct your body's energy if you're not, putting the right energy, the right fuel into your body.
Right. It's so fascinating because I've been also kind of on a journey of, why did this spiritual movement become so engrossed in veganism? And one of the things that, and this is something that I'm just going to guess first, is I know that a lot of yoga stems from India. And I know in India, they're mainly vegetarian, vegan, and that the cow is very sacred. So they don't eat beef in certain parts of India. So that was my first thought. And maybe from some of the parts of the world that a lot of these spiritual places are, Costa Rica, Bali, a lot of them are more focusing, like, just for what they have is more grains, plants, vegetables, fruits. So was my first assumptions. And I don't have I wish I had the exact answer to that, because I too have been very curious about all of it. Because in my opinion, when I think about eating an animal, how can you can't get any more spiritual than that. You're literally having the circle of life. It's a circle, it's a cycle. Something has to, in order for something to live, something has to die. And vegan diets are not, there's more death in vegan diets, if you think about it, with all of the small rodents and the small animals and the bugs and everything from the pesticides that they're using on the plants. Versus if I buy a cow for a family of four, is going to feed a family of four for a whole year. Not to get off track with that, but I to this day don't understand why people in the spiritual community are so connected to their vegan diet. And I mean, I have made it part of my mission to really start pioneering in the spiritual movement, teaching people and showing people that this spiritual community needs to eat more meat.
Awesome. I think that's a fascinating place for us to end on, but certainly a lot more of this conversation, I think, to be had. And we'll look forward to continuing it in the future. But in the meantime, let people know where they can find you, where they can follow you, and if they're looking for this type of work, how they can connect with you.
Sure. So you can find me on Instagram, and my Instagram handle is meat-based medium, just like MEAT based medium. And then you can also find my website at www.meatbasedmedium.com. You can also find me on TikTok, meat-based medium, as well as Facebook under Angela Christine.
Very good. We got all of that. And we'll provide all of that for our listeners who want more information. It will be available in the show notes. This was cool. It went a direction that I did not see coming, and very interested in. Fascinating, really fascinating. Angela, thanks for being with us. Let's keep up over the coming months and years just to see where this all goes. Because I think this perspective that to grow spiritually, we have to be more in tune and consistent with the reality of our physical bodies. It's pretty hard to deny that the human digestive system was not made for a primarily plant-based diet. That's biology. I'm not wrong, am I, Phil?
Not at all.
Not at all. No, we were not put on this planet to eat predominantly plants. If and any plants, we do not need plants to survive. So I'm right with you. And we're here to raise the vibration and heal the world.
Interesting stuff. Our guest has been Angela Christine, the meat-based medium. This has been the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast with Dr. Philip Ovadia. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to y'all next time.
Thank you.
Chances are you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't need to change your life and get healthier. So take action right now. Book a call with Dr. Ovadia's team. One small step in the right direction is all it takes to get started. Contact us at ifixhearts.com/talk. That's ifixhearts.com/talk.